Chapter 11. Tucker pulled into the parking lot of the stadium, glad to see it only half full. He wasn't late then. He'd been afraid he might be, having to drive slower than he normally would. Though the snow had stopped, the roads were still pretty slushy. Since Texas drivers rarely had to deal with snow, they were extra cautious, making the drive even slower than it had to be. A part of him wondered if they would even have practice today. Because it rarely rained and almost never snowed, the stadium only had a partial roof, which meant the field might still be covered in snow. Even if it wasn't, it would probably be a soggy mess. He grabbed his bag, locked his truck, and headed for the locker room. But as he reached the door, the unease pulled at his heart again. The guys had said nothing yesterday, but would they know today? Would Blaine tell them? A part of him didn't think so. After all, Blaine was the captain, and it was his job to make sure there was unity and harmony on the team. Spreading negative information, even if it was the truth, about a team member, certainly wouldn't do that. But what if Blaine was tired of dealing with him? What if he saw this as a way to remove Tucker from the team? Sharing the information about his community service might create enough tension on the team to get him traded again. Tucker took a deep breath and tried to clear his head. Blaine wasn't like that. He'd done nothing but be supportive to Tucker, so there was no reason to think he would change now. Besides, even if Blaine had told the other guys about the incident, Tucker would own up to it. He had been in the bar, and he could have refused to throw a punch. His actions were his alone, and he needed to stop passing the blame to others. He opened the door, fully expecting the hum of conversation to hush as he entered. But it didn't. The men who were there gave him a head nod, but no one shot him an accusatory gaze. Tucker threaded his way to his locker and dropped his bag on the bench. "How did it go at the center last night?" Blaine asked, coming up behind him. Tucker sighed and glanced around the room. Blaine's voice was low, but he had been hoping to avoid discussing the center. "It was fine. I aired up some balls and entertained the kids for a while." Blaine nodded. "Good. Glad to hear it. Just keep your head down. No more fights, no more bars. Understand?" Tucker had no desire to step in a bar again, but agitation stirred in his stomach at Blaine's words. He hated it when Blaine acted like this. He hadn't had a father figure in years, and he definitely didn't need Blaine trying to fill the role. "Yeah, I got it, Blaine." Blaine stared at him a moment longer before issuing a curt nod. "Good. Suit up and be ready to go in 10. We've got a long practice today and only a few more days to get prepared for the next game." After donning his pads and practice jersey, Tucker jogged out onto the field for practice. True to Texas form, the snow had stopped. The temperature had risen, though it was still cold without his heavy jacket on. Most of the snow had melted, leaving soggy ground beneath. Whatever snow had remained on the field had been cleared, but the moisture made the ground slick and spongy beneath his feet, just as he'd expected. A perfect recipe for injury if he wasn't careful. He wished he'd left the center sooner because his muscles were cold and tight as well, but there was no additional time to warm up. Rubbing his arms to get the blood circulating, Tucker jogged over to the huddle where Blaine was giving the directions for the day. "Okay, I want to run an up the middle and an off tackle. The next team we're facing has the #1 defense in the league, so our running game is going to be important. That being said, Jackson needs to remain healthy, so no tackles today, touch only. Is that clear?" The men nodded and Tucker took his place on the line. At the snap of the ball, he moved toward Blaine, took the ball, pocketed it in his arms, and ran up the middle of the line. He growled as his foot lost traction in the soft ground, and he stumbled before anyone had the chance to touch him. "All right, let's try that again," Blaine hollered as Tucker stood up. Frustration raged through Tucker as he made his way back to the line of scrimmage. Mud coated the front of his pants and socks, and his shoes squished, making his feet even colder. "You all right?" Blaine asked. "Fine, let's just run it again." Tucker handed the ball to Blaine, wiped his hands on the cleanest part of his jersey, and took his place in the line once again. "Hut!" Blaine yelled, and Tucker took off once more. He tucked the ball and pushed through the middle, managing a measly 5 yards. "Let's try an off tackle this time." Blaine said as he held out a hand to help Tucker up. Tucker nodded and took his place once again. This time when the ball snapped, he ran toward the right line after making sure the ball was secure in his arms. He broke through the line and was just about to kick his speed into gear when he felt a shove on his back. It wasn't that hard, really, but due to the slick grass, it sent him stumbling forward to the ground. As if fuel had been poured on a flame, anger burned within him, and he jumped up to confront the guy who had pushed him. "What's your problem? Blaine said no tackles." "I didn't tackle you. It was a touch, man. Chill out." "It was a shove, and you know it." Tucker pulled back his shoulders and moved until he was chest to chest with the other player. "All right, enough," the coach said, jogging onto the field and interrupting the two men before it could escalate into a fight. "Tucker, take 5. We'll run some passing plays while you cool off." "I don't need to cool off. He needs to learn what a shove is." "I said enough. Bench. Now." Tucker narrowed his eyes at his teammate and then stalked off the field. As he sat on the bench watching the next few plays, he tried to slow his heart and calm his breathing. He'd been doing so well the last few days, so why did his temper have to flare up now? Even more importantly, what could he do to stop it? "What's wrong?" Shelby asked as Tucker yanked open the front door. The scowl on his face reminded her of his first day, but she hadn't seen it since. He'd changed, at least when he was in the center. "Tough practice," Tucker said, shaking his head. "What do you want me to do?" "Come here and talk to me first. If you go out there looking like that, you'll scare the kids away, and I'd like them to come back tomorrow." She was teasing, mostly, but she did worry about him being around the kids like this. They had enough worry on their plate without adding whatever was bothering him to it. Tucker sighed but nodded, and a moment later he had dropped his bag and plopped down in the chair across from her. "I'm sorry, Shelby. I probably should have told you this earlier, but I have this anger issue. It doesn't come up all the time, and I have been managing it with boxing classes. But after our last loss, I mouthed off to the quarterback. I don't even know why. It wasn't his fault. But sometimes I just can't seem to stop it. Today it happened again. One of the guys pushed me a little too hard and sent me sprawling to the ground, and I almost lost it." He dropped his head into his hands. "I don't want to be so angry, but I have no idea how to stop it." Shelby pursed her lips together and placed a hand on his arm. She wondered if his anger issues had played a part in earning him community service. "Tucker, are you a believer?" "You mean like a Christian?" he asked, raising his head. "Yes, I mean like a Christian." He shrugged and ran a hand across the back of his neck. "I don't know. I guess I believe there's a God, but I can't say I've been close with him, at least not since my mom died. We pretty much stopped going to church then." Tucker's words hit Shelby like a brick, and she leaned back. No wonder he had anger issues. She'd seen it with the kids in the center who lost a parent or went through a messy divorce. Some retreated, some grew depressed, and some dealt with anger. She tried to think of the right words to say. "I'm sorry. I didn't know about your mom. How old were you when she died?" His hand moved from his neck to his chin. 12. Much younger than any boy should be when they lose their mother. Plus, my dad withdrew into his work after that, and I pretty much had to raise myself and my sister. Shelby blinked back the tears stinging her eyes. "Tucker, it's no wonder you're angry then. That is more than any child should have to deal with. But you don't have to deal with it alone. I know it's not the same because you can't see him or touch him, but God is your father too, and he loves you. More importantly, though, he can help you tame your anger and find forgiveness." Tucker's hand stilled and his eyes locked on hers. "Do you really believe that? You really think he can take away my anger?" She touched his arm again. "I know he can. I've seen him do it. My mom was just like that when I was growing up. She would get angry over every little thing. So angry that I used to hide under my desk when she would scream and yell. It was the only place that felt safe. And then one day, she just stopped. She stopped being mad all the time, and she turned into this amazing woman. I didn't ask her about it for a long time because I was afraid I might remind her and she would start yelling again. But one day I got up the courage. She told me that God took her anger away, that she prayed for peace and He gave it to her. Now I know your situation might be a little different, but if God could do that for my mother, then I know He can do it for you as well." Tucker held her gaze a moment longer and then nodded. "I believe you, but I'm not sure I know what to do." "I could pray for you," Shelby said softly, "if you want." He took a deep breath and Shelby forced herself to remain quiet while he thought. Then his hand covered hers and the corners of his lips turned up. "I'd like that." Warmth flooded Shelby as she closed her eyes. She hadn't been sure he would be open to it, but she was delighted that he was. "Lord, I want to thank you for being a good father to us. I know it isn't always easy for us to put our trust in things we cannot see, but I know that you can deliver peace. My friend Tucker needs that peace. Please take away his anger and help him find forgiveness. Also help him to see you. Amen." Shelby opened her eyes, unsure of what she would see. Tucker's face appeared softer, less rigid. "Thanks, Shelby. I am sure that I still have a lot to learn, but I do feel better. Now what can I do to help tonight?" "Well, I think Kenzie and Jennifer, our high school volunteer, could use some help with the kids. What do you say we go find them?" "Sounds good." "Ah, there's the star of the day." Kenzie's voice carried across the gym as Shelby and Tucker approached. "Who wants Tucker to play hide and seek with us?" The kids cheered, and the sound warmed Shelby's heart. She sneaked a glance at Tucker and saw that he was smiling as well. He probably didn't even know it, but being around these kids was helping him too, changing him. "I haven't played hide and seek for years," Tucker said, rubbing his hands together. "I bet I can find some good spots, though. You coming, Shelby?" Shelby shook her head. "You go ahead. At least one of us needs to stay out here and be the adult, just in case." "Suit yourself," Tucker called as he headed toward Kenzie and the kids. For a moment, Shelby envied Kenzie. How was she able to be so carefree and not seem to care about responsibility? It had been this way for as long as Shelby could remember. She'd been the focused one in high school, worrying about grades and studying every night. Kenzie had been the one attending parties and cramming the night before tests. In college, Shelby had only joined the studious sororities, while Kenzie had joined the ones who partied. Kenzie represented the side that Shelby would never be, and she supposed that was why they worked. They were like yin and yang, like peanut butter and jelly, complete opposites who complemented each other, and together made a force to be reckoned with. Still, that didn't mean Shelby didn't want to have fun now and then. She wished she could let loose and play with the kids too, like she used to. But if she didn't stay in control, if she didn't keep a tight eye on the center, she knew it would go up in flames, and that was something she couldn't let happen. It was too important to the kids, especially the kids like herself who hadn't been born into affluent households and couldn't afford the latest gadgets and gimmicks. With a sigh, Shelby returned to the reception area and pulled out the list of businesses she had canvassed earlier that afternoon. Thankfully, Jennifer had been truly under the weather yesterday, and, feeling better, she had come in this morning shortly after Tucker left. That had allowed Shelby to leave the center for a few hours to pass out flyers and beg for donations. Unfortunately, she hadn't been able to secure any, but the interest for the clinic had been high. She had saved the center for the day, maybe even through January if everyone showed up tomorrow night. But they still had a long way to go. Plus, there was the Christmas party. She still needed to find a donor to help out with that. Their regular guy had been strangely silent so far this year. Perhaps a reminder call would help. She had just picked up the phone when the front door opened. Sylvie Sanders from the Channel 5 News floated in, looking just as perfect as she did on television. Her blonde hair flowed like golden silk around her shoulders as if some invisible wind kept it aloft. And her figure was the perfect hourglass in her smart, tailored suit. A man holding a large camera entered behind her. "Can I help you?" Shelby had no idea why Sylvie and her cameraman might be at her center. Had they heard about the clinic? Or about Tucker? It was possible, but highly unlikely. It made more sense that they were lost. Though how people got lost today with maps on their phones was beyond her. "Yes, we heard that Tucker Jackson was working here and was holding a clinic tomorrow night," Is that correct? So they were here because of Tucker. Had the newspaper called them? Or maybe Tucker's PR guy had? She had forgotten to even ask him about that today. Either way, Shelby supposed she shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. The center could definitely use the publicity. But it would be nice to have somebody do a story on the center just because it helped out the local kids, and not because a pro athlete was around for the week. He's volunteering here, yes. Shelby hoped the smile on her face didn't look as fake as it felt. Wonderful. Could we talk with him? This has feel-good story written all over it. Sylvie's words were as smooth and polished as her appearance, but they were hollow and empty. Shelby wondered if the woman even knew what a feel-good story was. Sure, let me see if I can find him. He's playing hide-and-seek with the kids, so it may take me a moment. Why was she trying to discourage this? This was just the kind of publicity the event needed. But deep down, Shelby knew why. It was because Sylvie was the epitome of perfection. She was blonde, beautiful, and the type of trophy woman that a professional athlete would want to show off on his arm. She even made Kenzie seem average, which made Shelby feel even more invisible. So, while she appreciated the news station running the story, she just wished someone other than Sylvie Sanders was covering it. Sylvie's perfect eyebrows arched on her wrinkle-free forehead, and her lips twisted into a condescending smile. Hide and seek? In this place? Her nose turned up at the last two words, as if she couldn't believe she had to stand in this building. Why don't you just call him on his cell? Surely that would be faster. It would be faster, and Shelby had his number, but there was a part of her that wanted to make Sylvie wait. The woman looked as if she never had to wait, as if everything she wanted in life was delivered to her on a silver platter at the snap of her finger. No, not a silver platter. She probably had a golden one, the perfect 14-karat gold to match the tiny hoops in her ears and the delicate bracelet on her slender wrist. So yeah, she could wait. It might be faster, but we discourage cell phone use at the center. We want the adults to be engaged with the children, and we found that devices are distracting, so we don't allow cell phones except for emergencies. It wasn't exactly the truth, but it wasn't a flat-out lie either. It was the policy Shelby herself followed, and she had asked Kenzie and Tucker not to have their phones out when the kids were around. But there was no strict policy. She felt a little guilty fibbing to Sylvie, but she pushed it aside. I'm sure it won't take me very long to find him. Shelby mirrored Sylvie's condescending smile before exiting the room to begin her search. As she crossed the big gym, she felt very conspicuous in her bargain store pants and blouse. She normally considered herself a smart dresser. She always looked professional, even if her clothes were purchased secondhand. But next to Sylvie, she could have been the poster child for dowdy. Tucker wasn't in the kitchen or in the hallway. Where could he be hiding? She felt like time was speeding by and dragging at the same time. If it took too long, would Sylvie leave? Would she do a story about how terrible the manager was? Shelby quickened her pace, determined not to find out. She pulled open the door to the supply closet and sighed in relief when she saw Tucker inside. Shut the door, he said. You're gonna give me away. Sylvie Sanders from Channel 5 is here. She wants to interview you. His eyes lit up. Sylvie Sanders? The blonde? Shelby shrugged. Was Tucker's excitement over the interview or the woman conducting it? She shouldn't care. He hadn't expressed an interest in her, at least not in words. But there'd been moments where she thought he felt something for her, and imagining him with Sylvie felt wrong. Yes, on the surface, they worked with their good looks and perfect jobs, but there was more to Tucker than the stereotypical athlete who always dated the model-esque women. At least, she had thought there was, but maybe she'd been wrong. That's the one. Lead the way, then. Shelby led Tucker back to Sylvie and tried not to grimace when the blonde batted her eyes at him. Tucker Jackson, a little birdie told us you were working here. Do you mind telling us what you're doing in a place like this? Shelby bristled at Sylvie's insinuation. Yes, the place needed sprucing up, but it wasn't like it was a landfill or a death trap. the way Sylvie was making it sound. Tucker glanced at Shelby before pasting a smile on his face and turning his charm on. I wanted to give back to the community. Oh, brother. Shelby rolled her eyes as she made her way back to the reception area. It wasn't like she had expected him to admit he was only here to serve community service hours, but she hadn't thought he would lay it on so thick. Shelby hoped this interview brought some good publicity to the center and didn't backfire on her. The last thing she needed was anything else to go wrong.